the decline of the British pound as a reserve currency, and before that, the decline of the Dutch guilder as a reserve currency, all happened for the same reasons, which is, two things are going on. First of all, they're holding all of this dollars, and the stuff that we talked about is going on. And then also there's the weaponization through sanctions of the dollar. In other words, the United States' greatest weapon to use, as distinct from its military weapon, is sanctions. And so sanctions mean you freeze other assets, you freeze assets. Those assets are the bonds. And so that happened with Russia, and there are threats of it with other countries, China, and so on. And there's kind of the thinking, well, if I hold the bonds, can that happen to me? And and then why am I transacting in this other third currency rather than transacting directly? So, for example, the United States share of world trade has declined, and China's share of world trade has increased to become greater. And so if two countries are trading, let's say Saudi Arabia is trading with China, why do they why do they go to the dollars in order to do that? No good reason to go to the dollars, and they don't know that. Then they're worried about holding the dollars because they might get sanctioned. And so you see more of those transactions taking place in other currencies. And then the usefulness of the dollar as a storehold of wealth changes. It's like, think about it in, the most fundamental way. Everybody wants a medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth. So in other words, if everybody's using the dollar in world trade, then you want to save in dollars, because you say, okay, now that's the thing I spend in, and I save in the dollars. But over time, as the share of world trade goes down, why aren't they denominating in like China has a larger share of world trade? Traditionally, the countries that have the world's reserve currency have the largest share of world trade and the largest share of world capital flows. And because the United States has declined, and also there's a worry about that, holding it because of sanctions. I mean, just imagine how the Chinese must feel about having a lot of money in treasury bonds. Like, I would be worried that I would be treated like Russia would be treated. It's not something I would want to hold as a safe asset. And other countries who might feel that they can get sanctioned, and for all those reasons, they're less inclined to hold. And when we call dollars, what we're really calling is dollar debt, because you hold dollar debt. And that's what is a debt? It's a promise to receive currency. So, okay, so now getting out of those things and transacting in other currencies seems to be the safer thing to do for those countries. And so that's the dynamic that's taking place. So it's not an attack on the dollar. It's like, I don't want to hold those things. And so very similar to on the British pound, what happened is the British had the war, and they were the most powerful empire ever in the world. And they had World War II, and they came out of World War II financially in debt, a lot of debt. And who held the debt? All these countries held the debt because that was the residual from that. But they had a problem. They had a debt problem. And so they needed to print more money because it was too much of a squeeze. And then you had, so it deteriorated. And then they sort of said, please hold my debt, please hold my debt. They went to Commonwealth countries, the part of those that were in the former British Empire. And then you had the Suez Canal incident where there's sort of a war, and everybody realizes, well, hey, wait a second, that British Empire ain't the British Empire, and they're heavily in debt. And then they say, I don't want to own that debt. And there went the British pound. So that's just how the mechanics work.
Okay, so looking at the U.S. and I don't want to be cheeky and say speaking directly to the U.S. government, but if I were to be so bold, so if this is that predictable moment where, okay, there are actions that we can take as a country that will either help us keep the world reserve currency status, and there are actions that we can take that will cause us to lose that status more quickly. It seems like, okay, you've got the BRICS nations, they are moving away from the dollar. It seems like that card has already been played. I don't know if you think there's anything that we can do to make that easier. But certainly speaking to printing, so one thing that I've heard recently, and this is a really fascinating concept, that when you have other nations that are holding your currency, holding debt, as you said, they're not like hoarding cash, but they're holding a lot of debt. If we print money, what we're essentially doing is externalizing inflation. So we are causing a devaluation of that debt for all the countries that hold us. Now we're in a moment with rising interest rates that's causing us to need to print, but creating this really weird, difficult moment where as we print, then we have a need to raise interest rates. But the reason we're having to print is because we're raising interest rates. So it's a very difficult moment. But if we could, going back to your idea, it's how we are with each other. If we could get people to come together in the middle, would one of the things we would want to convince the U.S. government to do is to be very cautious about devaluing the dollar? Is that an important idea?
It's more basic than that, and it's more simple, but it's also more difficult. What the reason cycles exist is that the next stage has been determined by what has already happened in the prior stage. So we are in debt a lot. You can't change that. We got a lot of debt. And if you say, what could you do? I mean, two things come to mind. What you could do is you could be financially strong, and you can not use financial sanctions as